She thought you'd chase her forever. She thought you'd always be one call away, that no matter what she did, you'd stay. But what happens when you don't? What happens when you vanish without a word? No closure, no last text, just gone. She can feel it, not just notice it. And that's when the regret begins. These are the 5 silent moves that make women regret losing you. Number 1, cut her off without a word. You sit with the silence, not because you don't know what to say, but because you've finally learned that saying it changes nothing. You walk away, not because you're weak, but because explaining yourself to someone who has already decided your value is the most exhausting trap you've ever fallen into. And this time you've woken up. You've opened your eyes to the pattern, the emotional cycles where you teach her how to treat you by staying every time she crossed a line. And now you're no longer interested in being the man who stays to make a point. You're the man who vanishes to make a shift because you realize that trying to make someone care is a game where the only prize is disappointment. You remember the nights you waited for her to text, the moments you replayed the arguments in your head thinking, if you'd just said it differently, maybe she'd understand, maybe she'd change. But now you see that the problem was never how you communicated your feelings. The problem was that she didn't value them in the first place. And when you accept that, everything inside you changes. You begin to prioritize your energy like your life depends on it. Because it does. You can't afford to keep being the man who pours into a cup that's full of holes. The one who shows up after being ignored. The one who texts when she left him on read. Because that man suffers not from heartbreak, but from the slow death of his own self-respect. And when you finally choose to cut her off, to remove access, to delete her number, not because you're mad, but because you're done, something powerful happens. She starts to feel the cost of her choices, not through your words, but through your absence. She wakes up one day and realizes that the man she thought would never leave is already gone. No warning, no drama, no final message to make her feel better. And it hits her different. It makes her scroll back through the messages looking for the last sign of your presence, trying to pinpoint the moment when you stopped replying, when you stopped watching her stories, when your name disappeared from her notifications, and the confusion becomes discomfort. And the discomfort becomes panic, because she didn't expect it. She thought you'd always orbit, always explain, always be available. But now you're not explaining your boundaries. You're enforcing them with your actions, because real boundaries don't need validation. They just exist. And when she tries to test your silence with baited texts or social media traps and gets nothing, no response, no reaction, just space, that's when she starts to understand the depth of your decision, because most men make noise when they leave. They argue, they post, they try to get seen. But you didn't need to be seen. You needed to be free, and that scares her more than anger ever could, because it means you finally understood your value. And once a person understands their value, they become unmanageable, untouchable. They stop settling for crumbs because they know they're the meal. And you didn't post quotes or cryptic messages, you just disappeared into your purpose. And now you're not checking your phone hoping she notices. You're checking your calendar to see how many hours you can invest in your next win, your next skill, your next version. And when you build yourself in the dark, without audience or applause, you become the version of you that she only gets to remember, never touch. And you don't do it to teach her a lesson. You do it because you finally learned yours, and now everything you build is for the man who stopped asking to be chosen and started choosing himself. Because the truth is, if she had valued you in the beginning, she would have listened the first time you said it hurt. The first time you said you needed more, but she didn't, because she thought you wouldn't leave. And that was her biggest mistake and your greatest freedom. And when she finally realizes that you're not coming back, not because you're bitter, but because the man she knew no longer exists, that's when the regret hits her hardest. Not because you punished her, but because you healed without her. And the life you're building now has no room for people who didn't clap when you were broken. No room for connections built on inconsistency, and no room for love that needed loss to be appreciated. And if you ever feel tempted to reach out, remember the silence is not emptiness, it's clarity. And in that clarity you've found everything she never gave you. Peace, purpose, and power. And now you don't chase closure because you've closed the door yourself. And the next time someone crosses your line, you won't explain why it hurt. You'll just remove them from the equation and move on like they never existed. Not because you're cold, but because you're finally warm enough inside your own soul that you don't need their fire to feel alive. And this is how regret is born, not from punishment, but from the realization that they had access to something rare, and they lost it by treating it like it was common. And that's who you are now, rare, unavailable, and focused. Not because you're playing games, but because you're done playing yourself. And if you're truly ready to never fall back into the same trap again, to protect your peace with unshakable clarity, then this is your next move. Get the Stoic Relationship Blueprint audiobook. It's not just a book. It's a manual filled with timeless, practical principles that have already transformed the lives of thousands of men who once stood exactly where you are right now. You can now listen to it while walking, training, driving. Whenever you're moving, the wisdom moves with you. Ask yourself this: how many more lessons do you want to learn the hard way? How much longer are you willing to second-guess your worth, your standards? Once you get it, it's yours, forever. Every insight, every principle, always within reach, linked in the comments. Don't miss it. Number 2, grow in private. When she leaves, she expects you to fall apart, not because she wants you to suffer, but because she's convinced that your world revolved around her. And when someone thinks they're the center of your orbit, they assume the moment they step away, your entire axis shifts. They imagine you frozen, scrolling through old photos, typing out messages you'll never send, stalking her stories, decoding her silence, assuming she still holds the power she once had. But what she doesn't expect is that the moment she walks, you begin to walk too. Not after her, but forward, into a version of yourself that she'll never recognize. Because your growth isn't loud, it doesn't announce itself with flashy updates or showy flexes. It happens in quiet mornings, in empty rooms where your only audience is discipline. It happens when you wake up early, not because someone is watching, but because your purpose drags you out of bed. It happens when you choose to stay in and read, when you could be out wasting time with people who remind you of the version of yourself you're trying to bury. It happens when you say no to things that don't grow you, not because you're scared, but because you're committed. And every time you choose growth over comfort, you break the idea she had of you. You shatter the version of yourself that waited for her text. And you build a man who no longer needs to be seen to know he's valuable. Because now you're not just healing, you're evolving. You're learning skills that expand your income. You're building systems that protect your energy. You're surrounding yourself with people who speak life, not drama. And you're using your time with intent, not as a distraction from pain, but as an investment in your next season. And it's in this space that you stop reacting to her posts, her silence, her return. Because you understand that growth isn't a performance, it's a pattern. And the more consistent you become, the more unrecognizable you are to the person who thought they had you figured out. And while she might be out living like nothing happened, you're grinding in silence, stacking wins, gaining clarity, becoming emotionally bulletproof, because now you get it. Every moment spent wondering if she cares is a moment stolen from your future self. And when you truly grasp that, you stop chasing closure and start creating results. You stop needing her to notice your transformation and start needing yourself to respect it. And the irony is, the quieter your process, the louder your success will become. Not because you tried to be seen, but because the results will speak. your presence will shift, and the energy around you will change. Not in a mystical way, but in the way your eyes tell a story of someone who lost everything and still chose discipline. In the way your words don't rush to prove anymore, they simply state. They simply are. And when she finally checks in, tries to circle back, tries to touch base, she'll find a man who doesn't speak in past tense, who doesn't engage in what-ifs, because you're too deep into the what's next. You're living a life that makes explaining yourself feel unnecessary, because it is. And the best part, you no longer need anyone to understand your silence, your distance, your priorities, because those who are meant to be in your life will see the value without a pitch, and those who don't will remove themselves, saving you the trouble. And that's what this chapter is about. Not revenge, not games, but resurrection. Not becoming someone she wants, but someone you're proud of, someone you needed all along. And now when you walk into rooms, your posture speaks before you do. Your choices reflect your standards, and your peace is guarded not by isolation, but by intention. And no, this journey isn't easy, because breaking patterns means confronting pain. It means sitting in the weight of loneliness and choosing not to escape it with temporary highs or recycled situations, but to use it as fuel to build something permanent, something solid, something you can stand on when the next test comes, and it will. Because life doesn't get easier, you just get stronger, more aligned, more disciplined. And now you're not just growing in private, you're becoming undeniable in public. Not because you crave validation, but because transformation doesn't ask for permission. It just is. And anyone who lost you before this growth began will never be able to access the version of you that emerged, not because you're holding grudges, but because you're holding standards. And in this quiet rebuilding, you've found your voice, not the one that begs to be heard, but the one that only speaks when it's worth the breath. And that's power. That's presence, and that's exactly why she'll regret ever thinking your silence was weakness, because now your silence has built a foundation so unshakable, even if she wanted back in, she wouldn't recognize the door. Number 3, build a new life without her. The hardest part isn't walking away, it's realizing that the life you were living was built around someone who never saw your value, who only stayed when it benefited them, who treated your presence like background noise and your love like an option. And the real breakthrough comes not when you remove them, but when you start rebuilding a life that doesn't just function without them. It flourishes, it breathes, it thrives, because too many people try to move on while keeping pieces of the past in their pocket, and that's why they never heal. That's why their next chapter feels like a rerun. But you're done with that. You're done writing sequels to old stories. You're writing something new, and it starts with subtraction, removing the habits that kept you stuck, the places that held memories, the conversations that kept you in circles. And from that clean slate, you begin to build, not with rage, not with bitterness, but with precision, with clarity. Because this time you know what you want, and more importantly, what you won't tolerate, and every decision becomes a brick, every boundary a beam, until you've constructed a world that reflects your standards, not your pain. And the power is in the fact that you do this quietly. You don't need to post every meal, every step, every quote, because this life isn't for display, it's for living. And the deeper you go, the more distance you create, not just from her, but from the version of yourself that used to chase what hurt him. And now you don't seek peace. You build it. You don't ask for respect. You walk in it. And the people who meet you now will never know the man who used to wait by his phone, who used to shrink himself for someone who wouldn't bend, because he doesn't exist anymore. And if you've ever felt like your life stopped the day she walked out, good. Because that version of you needed to die for this one to be born. And now your days are filled not with overthinking, but with action, with focus, with movement. and the void she left. It's been replaced with purpose, with mission, with alignment, because you've chosen to be the architect of your reality, not a prisoner of your memories. And the more you build, the more you attract, not just people, but opportunities, alignment, momentum. And soon you realize you're no longer even healing. You're building so fast and so strong that the past becomes irrelevant. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer defines you. And when she tries to re-enter, to check in, to see if the door is still open, she won't recognize the life you've built, not just because it's better, but because it no longer has a place for someone who took it for granted. And you won't have to explain why, because the silence between you will say it all, and she'll feel it. The gap, the elevation, the version of you that used to be reachable, but now lives in a space she can't access. Not because you're hiding, but because you've outgrown the need to be seen by someone who never looked close enough. And you do this not to impress, but to align, to become who you were always meant to be before you got distracted by someone who didn't see the vision. And now every move is intentional, every yes is earned, every no is non-negotiable, and the life you're creating, it's built to last. It's built to reflect the man who doesn't explain his worth, who doesn't beg to be understood, who doesn't wait to be chosen, because he knows that the right people don't need convincing. They feel it, they show up, and they stay, and everything about your life now sends a message. This is what happens when you choose yourself. Not once, but every day, in every decision. And it's not lonely, it's liberating, because you're no longer dependent on someone else's presence to feel whole. And in that wholeness, you become untouchable. Not because you're hard, but because you're healed, and that's the life you build. Not as a response to pain, but as a declaration of your value. A life where every brick, every boundary, every blessing is rooted in the decision to never again beg for a seat at a table you could build yourself. Number 4, leave no trail to follow. She's used to men who say they're done but still linger, who delete the number and then resave it, who unfollow and then scroll in secret, who stop calling but still answer when she does. Because most men don't leave, they pause. They create the illusion of distance while emotionally staying attached, hoping she'll notice, hoping she'll regret, hoping for that one sign that she's finally realized what she lost. And that's exactly why she doesn't fear losing you, because deep down, she still senses you're available, that if she needed to, she could send one text and everything would reset. But you're not most men, and this time your silence isn't temporary, it's total. Because you don't just walk away, you erase the path that led to you. You don't just delete contact, you delete emotional entry points, the mental shortcuts that kept her tied to your attention. And it's not about playing hard to get. It's about choosing not to be found by someone who didn't value you when she had full access. And this is where most people fail. They claim closure, they post strength, but they still leave windows open, still watch stories, still scroll her page at 2 a.m. like somehow watching will make letting go easier. But it never does. It keeps you stuck. And when you're stuck, you're not healing, you're just dragging pain into another day. And if you want her to feel the weight of your loss, the real weight, not a performance, then you must disappear so thoroughly that it makes her question whether she ever knew you at all. And that starts with access, because as long as she can check your page, as long as she can peek into your life, she'll never feel your absence. She'll just study your movements like a game, like content. And that's what you've become to her, a passive form of entertainment, because people don't regret what they lose until they can't reach it anymore. And the only way to make her feel the absence is to remove yourself completely, not out of hate, not to get her back, but because your peace is worth more than her curiosity. And this means you stop feeding the connection in all forms. No views, no likes, no responses, no breadcrumbs. You stop telling mutual friends updates hoping it'll get back to her. You stop mentioning her name in conversations that lead nowhere, because even a whisper is a reminder that she still has space in your mind, and your mind is sacred now. It's the temple where your future lives, and she's not invited. And this is where discipline becomes non-negotiable, because the temptation will hit, the urge to peek, to check, to wonder. But every time you act on that urge, you delay your own freedom, and what you have to understand is that she doesn't regret what she did yet because you've made it too easy to forget the consequences. But when there's no sign, no signal, no message, no trace, she starts to think, and in that silence, in that vacuum, she begins to question everything. Was he really that hurt? Is he really gone? Did he really let go? And that internal dialogue is the beginning of the shift, because now she's not observing you, she's remembering you, not as the man who waited, but the one who vanished without explanation. And that mystery burns deeper than any final message ever could, because when someone suddenly disappears from your reality, your brain obsesses over the gap. And the difference between a reaction and regret is this: when you react, you give closure, but when you disappear, you give space for the mind to spiral, to analyze, to feel the void. And if you truly want to move on, you have to become emotionally untrackable, to the point where even if she asked about you, no one would have a real answer. And this doesn't mean you go underground. It means you stop performing for an audience that left the show before the ending. It means your life becomes a sacred journey, not a story for her to follow. And yes, this takes discipline, it takes strength, but what's the alternative? Staying emotionally tied to someone who broke you, feeding a connection that drained you, living in the hope that one day she'll see what she lost while you postpone your healing. You've done that before, and it cost you too much, but this time is different. This time you burn the bridge, not with fire, but with silence, with absence, with movement, and you don't look back, not because you're angry, but because there's nothing left to see. And when she finally tries to reach out, tries to tap into the old connection, she'll find no way in, no familiar cues, no leftover affection, just a closed chapter with no edit button. And that's how you move, decisively, permanently and silently, not for her to regret, but for you to evolve. Number 5, become the man she can't reach again. There's a moment in every man's life where he realizes the version of himself that was available to everyone, always explaining, always giving, always chasing, no longer exists. Not because he became bitter, but because he finally became clear. Clear on who he is, clear on what he deserves, clear on what he will no longer tolerate. And when that shift happens, it's not something you can fake. It's not a phase. It's a transformation that rewires how you move, how you think, how you breathe. And that's the moment she loses you for real. Not because you blocked her, but because even if she stood in front of you now, she wouldn't recognize the energy, the presence, the silence that replaced the old you. And it confuses her, it stings, because she counted on you always being emotionally available, always being just one message away, one late-night text from unraveling. But you're no longer operating from that space. You don't crave closure. You don't seek understanding, because you've already outgrown the version of yourself who used to beg to be chosen. And this isn't about playing a role. It's about becoming the kind of person who no longer fits into the story she wrote for you, because that story required you to be smaller, more forgiving, more available. And now you're too focused, too busy, too disciplined to entertain anything that distracts you from your growth. And she sees it, not because you're posting about it, but because she can feel the shift. The emotional access she once abused is gone. The predictable replies are gone. The reactive energy is gone. And what's left is a man who doesn't speak unless it's meaningful, who doesn't return just because it's familiar, who doesn't entertain the past because he's too invested in the future. And this kind of man, he can't be reached, not through apology, not through guilt, not through shared memories. because he's already made peace with the ending, and he doesn't need to rewrite it. He's living the sequel she doesn't have a role in, and that's what makes her regret real. Not the silence, not the space, but the fact that he moved on and never looked back. And that's who you become, not overnight, but through intentional growth, through building routines that ground you, through surrounding yourself with people who reflect your values, through choosing your goals over your urges, through waking up every day and choosing discipline over distraction, clarity over comfort. Because you've come to understand that the person who respects you most is the one you become when you stop chasing and start leading. And leading your own life means you don't explain your distance. You don't justify your growth. You simply live it, breathe it, embody it. And she watches from afar, trying to decode what happened, trying to reconnect with a man who no longer lives at the same emotional address. And when she reaches out, if she does, you don't answer with hate or rage or nostalgia. You answer with silence or self-respect or indifference, because that's what distance really is. Not physical, but spiritual. You've detached from needing her to complete the story, because you've become your own closure, your own validation, your own peace. And the irony is, once you become that man, the one who can't be pulled back, the one who can't be manipulated by past emotions, that's when they want you most. Because nothing is more attractive than someone who doesn't need to be needed. And she feels it in every ignored message, in every unanswered call, in every missed chance. And while she's scrolling, wondering, regretting, you're building, evolving, living, and not once thinking about what could have been. Because what could have been is irrelevant when you realize what should have never been. And now your standards are sky high. Not because you're hard to please, but because you're easy to lose. And you carry that energy not as arrogance, but as truth. Because the man you are now is the reward for the pain you endured, the lessons you learned, the love you gave, and it's no longer available at the same price, no longer on the same shelf, no longer open for negotiation. And that's why she can't reach you. Not because she doesn't try, but because you've leveled up so far that you've become invisible to the version of her that used to access you. And if she wants to reach you now, she'd have to rise, evolve, transform. And even then, it might be too late. Because you're not standing still. You're not waiting. You're not open to being reopened, because you've finally tasted the life that comes after letting go, and you're never going back. If you've made it this far, you already know. This message was meant for you. Society won't hand you this truth, because a man who knows his value, who walks away without a word, who lives by timeless Stoic principles becomes unbreakable. And unbreakable men don't beg, chase, or settle. That's exactly why the Stoic relationship blueprint exists, and why most will never find it. But you did. It's more than a book. It's your weapon against regret, distraction, and emotional traps. And now it's available as an audiobook, so you can absorb this life-changing knowledge while walking, lifting, driving, rebuilding. Once you get it, it's yours forever. The link is in the comments. Comment, "I choose peace" if you're ready to reclaim your